currently recording, and sort of to touch base again on our schedule. This is where we are. So today's the 24th. We should be about a week into Project 1, but what's probably going to happen is I'm probably going to postpone the due date on Project 3. I'm sorry, I don't remember if I said Project 3 or 4. We're getting ready to start Project 3. We're supposed to be about a week in, but really that first week would have been a little bit of a loss anyway, because that was a weird half week. So we're getting started today. And probably what I'm going to do is once we start talking about this, I'm going to push this back either a day or 2 days when we get to our final, when we're reading through the project. So I kind of leave that up to you. I want to make sure we still have enough room for the final, because the final is challenging. This project keeps growing. Every semester, it gets a little bigger. And next semester it's going to be even bigger. But I'm going to take some parts, or I'm going to pretty much take out Project 2. So we're going to combine Project 2 and 3 next semester. That hopefully won't affect you if you get through it this time. A reminder, you have the Project 2 stuff that was due last class period. If you made any revisions on that, go ahead and drop that in the folder today. I'm going to do a grading pass here pretty soon. Maybe Friday if I can, and hopefully I'll get to that at that point, and I'll be able to get you a more accurate grade on it. And of course, please, I continue to encourage you to put revisions in there for Project 1. I know a lot of people are like, oh, I'll get to that later. Later gets very busy. So where we're at right now, starting, we're going to work on a little bit of modeling again today. Mainly because, not because this class should be a modeling class. It's because I want you to kind of understand how to create assets, right? The future of what you'll be doing in the animation concentration is primarily going to be making things move, not actually modeling things. But in here, I want you to be able to kind of build a foundation of stuff so you can animate whatever you want, right? So let's talk a little bit about what Project 3 is going to be, and then we'll get started on one of those models today. And then from there, I kind of kick you off and let you model for a little bit, let you make some assets that you want to work on. I'm going to give you a couple of these assets for this project, primarily next class period, but we'll talk about that as we get into it. Mm-hmm. So if you're on D2L, it's PR3 breakfast, and let me go ahead and scroll down here where we can see it. Can I break this out into, yeah, we can see it from there, right? Let me zoom in a little bit. There we go. So in this, we're going to, while we're doing it, we're going to explore more complex models, more effects, and more rigging and animation. Basically, this project is just so you can get more practice on all of it. I'm adding a couple of things in here we haven't really done much of yet, which is effects animation. And that's one of the reasons this one kind of existed, so you can play around a little bit with some simulation, and we're going to talk about that probably in about a week is when we'll get started on that part of it. But I also just wanted, I just want you to be able to spend more time in Maya. The more you're in there, the more you're going to discover little things like, oh, that's a nice shortcut key, that saves me time. And you're not going to learn that without being in there for long hours. So this is a pretty big project. So what we're going to do is you're going to model a breakfast at a table. Every person has to have a minimum of 7 objects in their scene. Now, those 7 objects should be things that you're actually going to find on the breakfast table. A lot of times people are like, ooh, I'm going to model a refrigerator and a blender and all these things in the background. Like, try to stay focused more of like just what's on the table. Because after you model that refrigerator, you'll model a window next to it and be like, oh, I have to model the tree outside. Oh, I have to model that mountain in the distance. Oh, I have to model Saturn in the sky. Like, and it's like, now let's just stay on the table and focus on the little elements we can build in there. So a minimum of 7 objects. One of these objects I'm going to give you the model. You're going to work on the texturing, which is the cereal box. Okay. So we haven't talked much about UVs or materials, but I'm going to give you that next class period, and we're going to kind of take our time and texture this thing out, so you can see what all the hype is about UVs. It's not good hype. You're not going to enjoy them. So what is this?
And under vertex too.
Oh, okay. So this is a link to the older video of me modeling a coffee cup. You're welcome to follow along with that, but that's part of what we're going to go through today. So the first thing that everybody needs is a coffee cup. We'll need a textured cereal box. You'll need to model a bowl, a spoon, and your choice of 2 objects from the list below. You'll also pick 1 additional object from the list below that you'll rig and bring to life. Okay, so very similar to what we did with the bottle. So again, like this is a broad project. We're just doing all sorts of stuff in here. So keep your scope kind of small on the table, right? So let's look at the list. You can pick from any of these objects. So you can read through here: spoon, fork. Oh, well, spoon is already on the list. Fork, plate, bowl, egg, sausage, bacon, glass of milk, glass of OJ, glass of wine. You have a problem. Apple, orange, banana, biscuits, English muffin, a centerpiece of some sort, toast, pancakes, waffles, grapes, cereal, crepes, food box. So we're already doing cereal, but like if you want an additional like grape nuts or some other nasty thing you eat for breakfast, I don't know. French toast, lox. Anybody want to get crazy with it? Muffin, a butter dish, newspaper, a napkin. What I realized is I picked all of the stuff I think of as breakfast foods. There are different cultures. There are different habits. Some of you like oatmeal. Some of you like grits. Some of you think both of those are gross. Like, if it's not on this list, that doesn't mean I am banning you from modeling that thing. That means let me know. Because what I'm trying to avoid is somebody saying, I want to model this thing that is way too complicated to be trying to model at this. Like, I have this this milk jug that's shaped like a photorealistic cow. Can I use that? Like, that's going to be way more modeling than you want to do for this. Like, kind of keep it simple and build a scene, right? So all of these are things that, and we can look at some examples here in a minute of some that came out really, really well. So you're going to need to model the entire breakfast scene. We're going to texture it, or material it, I guess is a better way of saying that. Some of these will have textures. Some of these will just have materials that are like glass or ceramic or whatever. We're going to light it, we're going to animate it, and we're going to render it. Your animation should be 7 to 10 seconds at 24 frames per second. Again, do not model the whole room. You should include a tabletop. Just a box that is scaled with a texture on it. But that doesn't count as one of the 7 items, right? That's just your platform, right? That's where you're showing this off. So how is this graded? Every project in class is graded on a rubric, 25-point criteria, just like project 1. And so I like to show you the criteria in here. Modeling, lighting and rendering, the cereal simulation, the coffee simulation, and your overall presentation. Now, what I will do is when you notice one of the objects I said to pick one of those objects to animate it moving around. That's not a whole separate graded item. What I use for that is if you do that, I use that to bump up one of your grades. So that's a little bit of a bonus, right? If you decide not to do that and you nail all that other stuff, you could still make the full amount of points on this, right? Let's say you do an awesome simulation of the coffee, great lighting and rendering, great modeling and everything. You may get all of the 25 points without even having an object bouncing around. I really just wanted to keep your head in that like bringing things to life area of the game. So you can you can still not get rusty on that because that's the next thing we're going to go into. And it also just kind of makes them a little more interesting sometimes, like having a spoon dive into your bowl of cereal. So what we're going to be doing with all of this stuff, I'm not really going to walk you through the bringing the thing to life, right? We're going to model today, and we're going to model something a little more complicated. It's a coffee cup. Coffee cups don't seem that complicated, but there's a couple of modeling techniques I can show you that are handy, right? We're going to next class period. We're going to UV unwrap and texture our cereal box, and then after that, we're going to simulate cereal pouring out of that cereal box, right? Some of you may have thought about this before, animating a bowl full of cereal or a box full of cereal, filling up a cereal box. Do you have to animate every piece of cereal? The answer is no. For stuff like that, and this is what we're going to get into in the next few classes, there's a part of the animation industry called effects or simulation, right? Simulation is using a physics engine to generate motion, and in most cases, that's used to generate motion that would be too detailed or too complex or too multifaceted to animate by hand efficiently, right? Like I could animate every piece of cereal, right? But I would be animating on that for weeks, right? If I can just tell Maya, this is what gravity is, this is the things you're supposed to collide with, simulate, it can simulate that, right? Stuff like smoke, like what is smoke? Like how do you model a smoke, right? Like, and so that's another thing that simulation is used for. So the other thing we're going to do is whatever's in your coffee cup. It can be a teacup, by the way. If you're just like, I don't like coffee, I like tea. That's cool. We're going to put a little steam coming out of that, right? It's going to be very subtle. A lot of people won't even notice it unless they're looking for it. And then we're going to put a little bit of camera motion on there. If you have something moving around, bouncing around, that'll just add some additional entertainment value or appeal to the scene. So does that kind of make sense what we're aiming at? Okay. Anybody got some ideas churning already? Things you're wanting to put on your table? Yeah. So I thought it would be interesting, just to sort of start this off, to go look at some of. What did I just do? Oh, apparently nothing. Okay. I thought it would be interesting to look at some previous classes' assignments. We're going to talk about this folder more later. This is the Midpoint Review folder. Okay? So a couple of days ago, I guess it was on Friday, we had the Midpoint Review meeting as a faculty. This is the folder. You'll have one of these in either a semester or a year, depending on when you're in that class. Right? After you've taken all 4 of the principals classes, you do Midpoint Review. And Midpoint Review is where you submit the work from this class and all of your other principals classes as a form of application to the rest of the program, right? So it's basically, instead of us saying you have to submit a portfolio before you get here, like your high school portfolio or something like that, we say, come here, work with us for a year, and then submit the portfolio you make from that, and then that will let us decide, are you ready to move on to the rest of the upper level classes. If the answer is no, you can repeat the class, or maybe the advising is, we think you're in the wrong major, you should look at radio, film, TV, you should look at computer science. If that's the case, you haven't wasted a year, you've just gotten a minor in digital media. You've gotten most of the classes you need for a minor. I think there's just 1 or 2 left that you need. So we're going to talk about that a little bit more in detail. I just like to continue mentioning it to remind you to hold on to this stuff. Don't be like, okay, that's graded, I'm going to delete it. Like, save it, you're going to need it again. What happens is they take the projects from this class, they spend about half a semester in Midpoint Review revising those, and they turn them in. So I thought we'd look at a couple just out of the Midpoint Review folders. This isn't maybe their first iteration of it, but this will give you a good idea of what this project could be. So Wyatt's got some good stuff here. I think his is project 2. Did that work? Oh. So his room is maybe a little sparse, but it was part of his theme, bachelor chow. So basically, so this is an idea. Like this has all of the things in it you're going to need. You're going to need a bowl. You're going to need the cereal simulation. You see, he's got a little coffee or a little tea simulating there. He added some extra stuff. So this kind of breaks it apart to where you can see the different things. The cereal box design could probably be a little stronger. Let's look at, where is it here? Jarrett. It's project 2 for him too, yeah. So, again, he had an interesting concept, which is he said he wanted to make everything, he wanted his table to not make any sense at all. So it's like trying to eat cereal with a fork, World's Greatest Dad is reading the Twilight Saga, something to do with the teapot, whatever. Like he had an idea, right? Like you probably have an idea too. And it could be, this is what my breakfast table looks like. I don't have a copy of it right now. One student did, this is what breakfast looks like in a post-apocalyptic world when you're eating on a stump with a survival knife, right? So they went a little different route. Apparently they could still find cereal. So just get some ideas. And of course I'm showing you the good ones because I want yours to be one of the good ones. Let me pick maybe one more. Trying to remember Sierra's. I think Sierra's was really good too. Oh yeah, it's not bad. So you're seeing some of the issues that you're having with she's having with texturing there, but the simulation works pretty well. Now, there's a couple of them. Oh, you know what? I know some other people. Carissa McFarren. Wrong project. You get an idea of what that bottle project could look like, though. This is really solid one. No, did she turn in her breakfast? I think she did. Yeah. So, something you'll notice in these is that, I really like the splash at the end there. Something you'll notice in these is that everybody kind of chose a different theme. They're definitely putting themselves in there, right? Or at least something about their interests, right? So if you want Steven Universe cereal, that's cool. You just have to design that box. But something you may notice is that all of the cereal is round, right? That was by me encouraging them to make all of the cereal round. If you make it a different shape, like the Cheerios shape or something like that, it can be a lot harder to get it to simulate just using the method that we're going to use, right? I would encourage you to make round cereal. If you decide not to, I can work with you to get it to simulate in the right way. But if we make it round, you can't really tell whether it's rolling or not, and so you don't have to worry about how it rolls. If you make it donut shaped, if you make like a little Cheerio, how it tumbles and bounces against other pieces of cereal will change. So anyway, I'm just giving you some ideas. I think Cameron's is in here too, and it was good. I'm looking for one that had that it was a good piece, but still had the, what's Cameron's last name? For sure, yeah. So this was one like, everything about it looks pretty good. Is that like she did the Cheerios, and you see how they're not rotating correctly. They're all like perfectly level Cheerios. So that's actually kind of hard to get to happen. It's not impossible, but we have to fight with it a little bit. So that would be one of the reasons I would encourage you to go round with your cereal. The other thing I want to kind of point out is, as you may notice, some people put more work into the modeling. Some people are putting more work into the texturing. Some people put more work into the simulation, and some people put more work into, or put a lot of work into that little like spoon or cup or whatever coming to life. It usually seems to be the spoon. A lot of people do the spoon because there's a pretty good plan of action on what that spoon could do, right? Jump into the cereal. And that's really perfectly fine that everybody chooses the thing that they are really enjoying the most and runs with, right? As long as you're meeting the requirements of all of the elements of the project, if there's a part you're enjoying, like, go nuts. Like, I think I kind of called, I think, Ben out on it the other day on the bottle. Like, you're obviously enjoying modeling. Yeah, like, if there's an extra model you're wanting to make it, put it in there. But make sure you're checking off all the requirements for the rest of the project too. Don't be like, I decided not to simulate anything, I just modeled a whole bunch of stuff instead. And that's why I show you the rubric. And so if you feel like you're meeting the criteria of all those rubrics, but you're loving animating the objects bouncing around the scene, it doesn't just have to be one spoon. You could do like 5 spoons fighting to get into the cereal, right? So it's whatever you're wanting to do. Yes. This like sparkly thing happening here? No, I think that it's a rendering issue, most likely caused by the sampling in the glass. So, when I was talking about lighting the other day, I said, like light particles come through the window, bounce around the room everywhere, and sort of settle and on the objects. So eventually they lose their energy, right? I think what you're seeing is, I believe, if you were to turn the samples up on either the glass or the fabric, I think what's happening is light's passing in through the fabric, and light's passing in through the glass and bouncing out, and there's not enough samples, so we're getting these like errant little white dots that are popping up for one frame because of the way the light bounces through the glass. I believe it's something to do with that. But yeah, it's a lighting thing, not a. And so you're going to see some of that happening in yours as well, even if you don't do transparency. You'll notice I mentioned on a few of you critique-wise, like grain in your shadows. And so yeah, that's a rendering thing. In all honesty, to me, the rendering is still really good. That's just a setting she needs to change to get that cleared up. And that may be in there just because she couldn't turn the settings up because it would have drove the render times through the roof. So, okay. I think it said 7 to 10 seconds on the thing. I usually use that as a guide. Like if yours comes in 6.5 seconds, but it's looking really good, like I'm not really nickel and diming you. And if yours is 12 seconds, but you kept me entertained all 12 seconds, that's cool. I did that because one of my early semesters here teaching, I forgot to put a time limit on the project. If I would have put a time limit on that project, it would have been like 12 seconds at the most, right? And somebody turned in a 1.5-minute long animation, and the animation was really bad because they spent all of their time trying to get a 1.5 minutes done instead of all of their time trying to make 12 seconds look good, right? So I usually just put that on there as a guide to roughly stay in that boundary. If you go plus or minus by a second, that's not a huge deal. Just try to stay in that range. So. Okay, questions about this project? Like everything in this class, I try to combine a little bit of me walking you through it and a little bit of me like letting you run and play, right? Like go out, try that, fight with it, figure out what's working good for you, make it your own, right? And so the parts we're going to walk through in this class is going to be modeling a coffee cup, which after you've modeled your bottle doesn't seem like it's going to be that big of a deal. But there's a couple of little techniques in there that I think become very handy in getting that handle attached, right? We're also going to go over UV unwrapping and texturing the cereal box. Cereal box isn't the most complicated thing we can unwrap and texture, but it's a good place for you to hopefully wrap your brain, no pun intended, around the concept of UV unwrapping. And then we're going to go through the process of lighting and simulating the cereal pouring out of the box, that day is going to be a very trying day, and simulate the steam coming out of the coffee. Some of you are going to love that. Some of you are going to hate that. And that's going to give you an indication of some of the choices you make in the future. Because one of the things you can do in the animation concentration is more like character and 3D animation, where you're setting keyframes, like that bouncing bottle, or jumping bottle, bouncing ball. But the other part is simulation and effects animation. And that's when, like, Iron Man throws Hulk through a building, and the building crumbles and big chunks fly off, and there's dust everywhere, and there's an explosion from a gas tank out behind the building, and like all of that stuff has to be simulated through effects. And that is something we cover in the animation concentration. Usually either James Livingston or Marty Fitzgerald teach that class, and it's some great stuff. So I think that kind of pay attention to what you're enjoying, like what parts of this you think are fun. It's all going to be a little challenging, but if you're enjoying the results, like maybe this is giving you an idea of where to go. So, all right, you're always welcome to ask more questions about the project. This is up on D2L. Oh, the last thing, figuring out when this is due, right? So this will be rendered. Whoa, what happened? So this is a rendered MOV MP4, be due at the beginning of class on XXXX. And of course, I'll deduct points if it's an enormous file, just because we need to save space on the network. So let's look at our schedule and decide when we want to make this due. I'm going to give you a little bit of flexibility on this. We could still keep it due at this point right here. We basically lost a week of work, but you'll notice from where I was at, I kind of built a week of work time into it. What my thinking is we either put it off till the 12th or the 14th. What's your thinking? The 12th gives you the weekend to work on it. We come in on Monday and it's done. The 14th means you get the weekend plus a couple of days, but it's starting to squeeze into our final time, and this part gets pretty challenging too. So my preference would probably be to have it due on the 12th. How do y'all feel about that? Okay, let's do that. That's in the wrong spot entirely. Like rigging is going to be a little further down here, so I don't know what I was thinking there. Okay, that's cool. So this would work out good. That means if I can get to it, I'll change the schedule around and repost it. But basically, if we have this due on the 12th, that means we'll do a critique day on the 12th. We'll look at all of it. If we have time, we'll do the jobs talk. But if not, we'll do the jobs talk on Wednesday. And I'm calling it the jobs talk just because there's things we need to discuss about career paths. But really, it's also about midpoint review. So that little bit of stuff we talked about earlier, I know you all have questions about that. And so I like taking a whole day where we can discuss that, and where we can discuss like the decisions you make there, what career paths is that going to lead you to. So that's probably what we're going to do is have it due on the 12th, the 14th. We'll talk about jobs and kick off our final project. Actually, we may go ahead and kick off the final project on the 12th. I'll just show it to you or give you the assignment so you can start working on stuff, because some of this is going to be coming up with your own concepts and your own designs. Of course, at any point, you're welcome to read ahead and see what that actual final is. In fact, I'll tell you now, it's a robot or some form of two-legged creature. We're going to make it walk. So we're going like full-on character animation for that one. Okay, so let's go ahead and put that in there, 11, 12, 18. On Monday, November 12th. Okay. Sound good? I'll bold that so you can find it. And this should update live in the document. So, all right. So let's start. Again, I'm broadcasting on D2L if you want. I'm sorry, on WebEx if you're wanting to follow along that way. And I am recording the video so you can also follow along that way. first things first, I'm going to model a coffee cup. All right. So whenever we start modeling, we are limited to a handful of different primitive objects, right? We have a sphere, a box, a cylinder, a polygon cone, all these things here. If you go up to create and polygon primitives, you'll see the list gets a little bit bigger. A super ellipse, whatever that is, spherical harmonics. I'll have to play with some of these. A gear, so gears are kind of neat. When we're on our robot or two-legged creature, you may find a use for that, right? So there's all of these primitives, but this is the only models that are built into Maya, right? There are other programs where you're like, oh, I'm going to click the character button, and it gives you sort of a generic character mesh, right? But if you decided you wanted to model a character, there's no character button in Maya. So what we have to do is we have to start with one of these primitives and start refining it into a way in which we can eventually have the model we want, right? And sometimes the challenge with this is that the primitive you should choose, or the primitive that's going to give you the best result, isn't always the first one that comes to mind, right? I can't tell you how many times students have said, I'm going to start a character, I'm going to start with their head, I'm going to click a sphere, right? Because our heads are kind of round-ish, right? In terms of modeling, though, a sphere is not probably your best starting point. Why not? Anybody have any ideas? Yeah, a sphere is all rounded. And if you want to start getting sort of that, like, our skulls are actually a little bit more boxy. Like, there's a little bit more of a front, a side, and a top to that, right? And the other thing that may be less obvious is if I click on a sphere, you'll notice that it's mainly a bunch of quads here, right? A bunch of four-sided faces. But if I reduce this, notice what's at the top right there. It's a bunch of triangles that all pinch together, right? And so that can sometimes be a problem, just because once I start editing things, all of those triangles are all trying to meet in that one location, right? So if I move this edge down, like this, right, I get this line that kind of connects there. And if I smooth that, I start getting this weird wrinkle that's happening all at this point here. The interesting thing about that is if I just made a box with no subdivisions and smoothed it, I get a sphere, right? So some of this is just learning, or thinking ahead and saying, which of these primitives is going to allow me to get to that model that I need with the most efficiency. It's not the easiest, it's the most efficiency, right? So I need to model a coffee cup. Let's look up coffee cup, see what those look like. Hard to spell coffee, Greg. Cup. There we go. Oh, Starbucks. It's only so many miles away. And there we go. Images. So the coffee cup I'm going to go kind of simple. I'm going to do something that's kind of this like square variety, right? Something like this. Some of you may be wanting, yeah, here we go. Nice and, oh, you can barely see that. There's not as much contrast on that screen, so. Goodness gracious. There we go. So this is kind of the shape I'm going for, right? So, and this will be fun too, because once we learn to UV, you can put whatever you want to on your coffee cup within polite reason. So which primitive objects would you start with? Like we got all sorts of shapes in here. Like would you start, I mean, we can go back and look at our list, right? We have create polygon primitives. Would you start with a sphere? Cylinder? So we got a couple of pretty good options here. Anybody see another thing that they might consider starting with? There's a pipe, right? So there's something to think about here. Our coffee cup, we have a cylindrical shape, right? But it has a hole in it, right? If we just make a cylinder, there's no hole, right? If we make a pipe, there's a hole, but that hole goes all the way through. Can't hold coffee, right? Let's look at that. So if I go to create polygon primitives, I make a cylinder, create polygon primitives, I make a pipe, and we can just sort of scale that up to see what we get. So I got two very similar objects here. And so my decision on this, that's the pipe. I just adjusted the thickness a little bit and height on it. It may not be in your, so that pipe may not be in your polygon modeling shelf. You have to go to create, and it's under poly models, or create poly primitives, I think it is. Create polygon primitives, and it's about halfway down pipe. So one of these has a hole all the way through it. The other one doesn't have a hole at all. Right?
How'd you make it thinner?
Oh, if you select it on your poly pipe inputs, it's just the thickness here. You can sort of adjust how thick it is. So we got these two options. So my question comes down to what is going to be most efficient, right? I could turn either of these into a coffee cup. There are methods in which I can fill in that bottom hole, and there are methods in which I can cut a hole into the top of this cylinder. My decision is usually made off of thinking a couple of steps forward and saying, what's going to cause me the least amount of complications in the future? For me, it's a couple of steps easier to take the cylinder and sort of bore a hole into that versus trying to figure out how to perfectly fill in the bottom of that coffee cup. I can show you both ways, but effectively what we'd have to do to fill in this bottom is delete all of these faces. You don't have to follow along on this, I'm just kind of showing you. Delete all of these faces. Sort of grab this edge, move it up a little bit. That's the inside of my coffee cup, right? And then I can go to Mesh, Fill Hole, and then Mesh, Fill Hole. And that works really pretty good, and that was pretty simple, right? Except if I hit 3 to smooth this, we get a really nasty bottom to this cup, right? And the reason for that is because, this face here is 4-sided, right, which is good. 4-sided faces are fine. 3-sided faces are fine. 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, those are not fine. Anything over 4 starts giving us complications in modeling. And if we look at this face here, it's a 20-sided face, right? So Maya's like, what am I supposed to do with that? Like, I understand a square. What is this? How is this supposed to round, right? So for us to actually make this usable, we have to go in here and add some additional edges to it. So we could do it with like Mesh Tool, Multi-Cut, and sort of click here, draw a cross, and start making these like divisions in here. And that's just a lot of clicking just to fill in that hole. So let me show you why I choose cylinder. Because for me, cylinder just means I can go over here, zero this back out, to my polycylinder 1. I can add a few height divisions. Right? Crank that up, something like this. I can add a few cap divisions, which is going to put me some circles here. And let's just do like 1. And now if I smooth this, I'm starting to already get something like a coffee cup. So 1 and 3 is how we go back and forth between smoothed and unsmoothed, right? I put that 1 cap division in there for a reason, because if I go in here to edge, double click on this edge, it'll select that entire thing. I can scale that out. And then I can select all of these faces around through here. So I kind of have to do it one at a time. That's a little slow.
How many divisions did you do around the body?
I don't know, actually. I think I just 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. It looks like 5 or 6. I was just kind of eyeballing that because we can always insert more of those. So after I have this cap selected, I can extrude it. And that's one of the tools we've already learned, right? Anybody remember the shortcut key for extrude? Control E, right? Control E, like extrude is probably the modeling tool that you will use the most, okay? And extrude is actually really powerful. If I hit Control E, you'll notice a couple of things. Watch what happens to my locator. Like right now I'm on 1, right? I'm on move, right? Control E, my locator changes, and I get this tool. Now, the model still looks the same, but the model isn't the same. It basically took all of those faces, it duplicated them, and connected them to the original edge. And so if I move that up, I can make this grow out of the top, right? But if I move that down, I can make it go into the object. And so I can kind of just, from this side view, pull that down to where that feels like it's about the right depth in the coffee cup, right? Now, some cool things about this, like if I were to hit smooth right now, it rounds the bottom just a little too much, right? So I can add some additional divisions with this poly extrude face menu here. So by clicking on divisions and starting to subdivide that, and it will add divisions to my extrusion. So now when I smooth that, I get a little bit more of an appropriate rounding on the bottom of my coffee cup.
Oh, wait. How do you do that?
I just turned up the number of divisions. So,
Like getting that box floating there.
I extruded. Are you?
Oh, I see it.
So like when you when you so like when we're in W, I hit Control E, move that down, and then added a few divisions in there to get me some depth in this, right? Something like that. Now, again, like there are probably exact numbers that you could type in here to get you the right number of divisions to get the exact rounding that you would want on this. Modeling takes a couple of different flavors, right? There's the people who model for aesthetic purposes, and in most of the entertainment industry, that's what we do, right? Games, it does not necessarily matter if your your post-apocalyptic Volkswagen bus is perfectly physically accurate to proportions and scales. It just has to look cool, right? Whereas if you're modeling for an architect, then accuracy is important, right? Most of the time when I'm teaching this class, I'm teaching for aesthetic appeal, like how does it look, making it look the best. And some of that's going to be something you have to decide, right? Something you may like a thicker, like fatter coffee cup. To me, I like the coffee cup that is going to get the most amount of coffee into my body as quickly as possible. Most of my coffee cups are novelty coffee cups that nobody ever actually intended you should drink coffee out of, but I do. So your call, like how you want to do that. Right? So 3. Now, I want to go ahead and hit W. I want to show you a couple things about this extrude tool that can get you into trouble. Actually, the extrude tool, people use it a lot, but the problem is they use it kind of willy nilly, and I understand that right now you're still getting a little comfortable with, or getting comfortable learning how Maya works, right? Like you're maybe still trying to remember shortcut keys for stuff, or your hands aren't quite comfortable like tumbling and panning, and like you're still just getting used to that. And so be careful when you're using extrude, because what sometimes people will do is they'll go in here and they'll select a face, right? And they're like, I want to extrude that face. And they'll hit Control E to extrude. And then somebody next to them will be like, hey, did you watch Game of Thrones last night? And you'll be like, oh, yeah, I did. That was great. Like, Cersei's awesome, right? Or Cersei's terrible, whatever team you're on. Team Cersei, whatever. And then you'll go, wait, did I hit extrude? I don't remember. It looks the same. Maybe I should hit extrude again. Don't hit extrude again. Like the way you can tell if you hit extrude is by hitting 3. Look what we got there. Let me move this dude out of the way. So even though unsmooth, this looks exactly the same, there's a duplicate face there, right? If I just go back to move, look, it looks like nothing has changed. But if I select that face, move it, you'll see that it has, right? There's like an invisible face right here because these two edges are on top of each other, right? And Maya knows that even if you can't see that. So when I smooth this, we get this weird little bubble there, weird little like ripple. Now, if that's something you wanted intentionally, that's cool. If it's unintentional, sometimes people are like, I broke my model, what do I do? Very often, it's happened in this class that people have done that on a model to an extent that the easiest answer was to hit delete and start over, right? And that seems very frustrating, but that second time they built it, didn't have those in it, right? So if that happens to you, if at some point you hit 3 and you're like, what happened to my mesh? How did I do that? Oh, it's got all these things in it. Like, don't sweat it. Like, that's just an opportunity to get better at this by doing it a second time. I am an optimist, glass half full kind of guy, right? But it really is like that's how I've learned everything in my life, is by screwing it up once, right? At least once. And often it's by screwing it up multiple times. So very few, if any of you, are going to like go through this perfectly the first time. And so if that happens, that's all right. Just delete it. Try it again, right? So let's look at our coffee cup again. To sort of our rough eye, like just looking at it, it looks pretty good, right? But we have reference here, right? We have coffee cups that we can pull in here to model around, right? So I'm going to go ahead and do that with one of these. How about this Liquid Patience coffee cup here? Can you all see that? I can, but I don't want to pick an example you can't see. Number 1 counselor. That's not bad. I'm trying to find something from a side angle here that we could use. World's Best Boss. You can see that one. Kind of. And the only reason I'm looking for this is to make sure my proportions are, yeah, that one's okay. Yeah, I could probably darken that up a little bit, but let's use this one. So I'm going to right click, open image in new tab, and then right click on that, save image as. Now, I haven't started a project yet. So my instinct, like I know a lot of you are like, oh, I'll just put it in my documents and deal with it later. This is one of those projects that a lot of people end up revising. And that means you're going to put it on a hard drive, and then you're going to switch it to another hard drive. You're going to come back to it at midpoint review, and none of your textures are going to be where you thought they were, and you're going to spend hours revising it. Take a little bit of time right now. So let's just go ahead and make a project for this thing, right? We'll call this the breakfast project. So I'm just going to go back to Maya, right? I'm going to go File, Project Window, and go ahead and hit New here. Now, right now it's wanting to put it in my Documents Maya projects. I'm going to put it somewhere where I can actually find it or will actually use it. For me, just because I'm doing this in class, I can put it on my desktop. You can put it on your desktop at home too. Here you can't. You need to put it on a hard drive or the student server or something like that. But let's go ahead and select my desktop. We'll call this Breakfast, right? And hit Accept. And you'll see what happened here is if I go back to my desktop, now I have this breakfast folder, and underneath it are all the folders I need. Right? I'm going to put this one in source images, and I'll call this cup ref. In fact, you can put other folders underneath here. Like you can make a reference folder and just put it in there. Right? And you'll see on my desktop, I'll put it on the other screen. Let me go get it. Didn't it? Oh, no, there it is. You'll see on my desktop, there's the project, right? Again, like, texture is not lining up. I know we haven't dealt with that a ton yet, but this is going to be a big issue for you. So definitely, like, use this. Like, set your project. Keep all of your things in your project. Every time you open Maya in this lab, go File, Set Project. So when you create a new project, it usually automatically sets it for you. But whenever you open up File, Set Project, and choose that breakfast folder. Okay. Now that means that if I need a reference image in here now, I can go to, let's go to my front view, sure, and click this button right here, my image plane, and it's going to say where, and notice where it goes. It immediately goes to breakfast source images. That's because I set my project, ref, cup ref, open. So there it is. Yeah, again, I can see it probably a little better than you can. So even though, like, if I just glanced at that coffee cup I had modeled, it looked right, you'll see that proportionally, I was way off, right? My cup is way too small. I also, like, I'm going to kind of move this up a little bit. So I'm a little more along there. So it's way too small, or not tall enough, I guess. And there's some other little things that I think are worth noting, such as pull this up to where it sort of lines up a little bit. So the other things that are kind of worth noting is like how round certain parts of this are. Right? Like if I look at my coffee cup, it's rounded on the bottom, but not quite that much, right? It's more like it's got a sharper bevel to it, right? And the same can kind of be said for the lip of mine, right? If I go up here to the top, like that's just very computer generated looking, right? So I can add some more details in here. The other thing to notice is where my, if I go to my front view, where my edges on this line up with this handle. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and scale mine up, kind of get it a little bit more to the right proportions. Just using this as a vague guide or a rough guide, right? And I'm going to start playing around with these edges. I'm going to bounce back and forth between 1 and 3. And you'll notice that this edge kind of lines up pretty good there. This one lines up pretty good there. So I could do a little bit of something like this to try to keep them in there. Now when I hit 3, it's going to go off just a little bit, but it's going to be close. Right? Now if I need another edge along the bottom here, right? I mean, I guess I could steal that one and slide it down, but there's another tool that will create an edge loop. What is that? Do you remember? Insert edge loop. Mysteriously named. This is going to be under Mesh Tools. So insert edge loop is a little confusing to some people. I'm going to select the model, mesh tools, and then insert edge loop, right? Now, think about this. What is an edge loop? It's this ring of edges that go all the way around my model, right? So before I click that insert edge loop tool, you'll notice that if I select an edge here, if I just double click it, it selects this entire loop that goes around the model, right? If I double click on this, it just recognizes from the rest of this model's topology, like there's a parallel edge here, a parallel edge here, there's these perpendicular edges here, that if I double click on this, the next edge I'm thinking of is probably this one, not this one, right? Like it's not that I double click on this edge and I get a zigzag line that goes up to it. It just intuitively knows that edge sort of makes a loop around our model, right? So inserting edges is going to do the same thing, or insert an edge loop is going to do the same thing. If I go to Mesh Tools, Insert Edge Loop, I'm going to have to click and drag around the edge that I want to make the edge loop crossing, right? So if I click here, it's going to put it up and down. And that's not necessarily what I wanted, right? It's definitely not what I wanted. So I have to click on one of these vertical loops, and if I keep it held down, I can sort of slide that up and down to get my edge loop. Now, let's talk about that down here on the bottom. If I needed to add another edge loop on the bottom, this is this contiguous ring of quads, right? So it knows where to put an edge loop in that. It's going to be more confused about these triangles, though. So if I click here, it doesn't know what to do, right? It doesn't know if I want that edge to keep going around this circle or if I want it to go up through the top and go along that way. So you kind of have to be a little careful with that, but so now I have these two edge loops, and I've just pushed those closer together, right? So basically, I've made the distance that needs to be softened along these three edges shorter, and so when I hit 3 now, I get a sharper edge, right? I can always scoot that closer even more to make it sharper, or I can pull it away to make it softer. Now, the thing to remember, though, is that this, unsmoothed, is what the model actually looks like, right? So as much as I can like continue to push and push and push and get this sharper, when I go back to 1, I've actually gone past the original edge, and so we gotta be careful about that. So I'll put it somewhere like this and hit 3, and that's getting the rounded edge I'm kind of looking for. So the same thing can happen up here at the top, right? I could go back to Mesh Tools, Insert Edge Loop. I could put one around here, and you'll see that when I go back and forth between 1 and 3, that kind of sharpens that edge a little bit more, right? I could also do that around the inside link. So you see this button right here? This, bless you. This is my last, bless you. This is my last used tool, right? Bless you. Goodness. So this is the last tool I used, which was the Insert Edge Loop tool, right? So instead of going back up to the menu, I can always click here to get back to it. So now I have that Insert Edge Loop tool. If my object is smoothed while I'm doing this, it tries to show me the unsmoothed version as a cage as well. So I can kind of go back and forth between those. But I can insert an edge loop there. And so now I'm getting a little bit of a sharper edge there. Cool thing about this is I can start messing with this, right? I can scale this in just a little bit to get a little bit of a lip on my cup, right? Or I can go back to this tool. The shortcut key for the last used tool is G, as in Greg. But Control G is group. So you have to be careful. Just regular G will repeat the last tool. And then I can insert this edge loop along the top edge here too to give myself a little bit more control of the way this is smoothing, right? Do I want to raise that up a little bit? Do I want to push it in more? This is really my way of controlling this. And again, if I wanted to bulge this just a little bit, I could just scale it out. So we can build whatever type of coffee cup we want. Like I think of those Waffle House coffee cups that for some reason seem to have this really big like fat lip around it. It's almost like the glaze kind of puddled there a little bit. So you can add just a little bit of that effect. Okay. So it's looking pretty good. I'm okay with this. So the next thing we need to figure out is how to add a handle to this thing, right? And I've seen this happen so many times, so many people. It's probably, like if I were to walk around, it's probably on at least one of your screens now, which is like, you got a little bit of a head ahead of us and you're like, I need a handle. Hey, this is kind of like that shape. And they just make a donut and maybe scale it or rotate it and move it over, plow it in there, right? The problem with this, and it's not that this is necessarily the wrong way, it's that that's not finished, right? If I look really closely, I can tell, I don't even have to look that closely, I can tell that this is two different models. I can tell it by this unnatural way in which it meets that corner, right? I could also just look inside and see that that's messed up. Now, there's ways that I could use this mesh, right? But if those two things were two different pieces, whenever I pick up my coffee cup, the handle would just break off, right? It was more than likely how this was made is two pieces of greenware, two pieces of clay, right? Were sort of mashed together, and then they fired that, and it sort of fused it all together into one piece of ceramic. And then to make it even more of a single object, they glazed the entire thing, and that put this like clear coat shell around the entire thing. So those aren't two objects. It's not that I can just take that handle on and off, right? As opposed to my bottle right now, my water bottle, I can take this lid off. This is a different piece, right? And so when it's a different piece, it's okay to model it as a different model. In fact, that's probably the smartest way to do it, right? But when it's all one piece, this is where modeling gets more complicated. We have to decide, how am I going to make this all one contiguous piece of mesh, right? Think of if you were to model a human being, right? And you model the head out of a sphere or a box or whatever, and then you get to the neck, and you're like, okay, that's a cylinder. So you just put a cylinder in there, right? And then you're like, okay, the chest, that's kind of an elongated box. And the arms, that's two different cylinders. And this hand, that's a sphere, right? And what you have is all these individual models, all these individual shapes, forms in there, right? But that's not how a human body is really made up, right? We are just one giant lumpy, like, flesh bag, right? Like we are a single piece of skin that's all connected, filled with different muscles and tissues and everything. A character model is all one piece, with the exception of like eyeballs, maybe fingernails, maybe. That's all going to be modeled out of one piece of mesh. So how to get that complicated shape is really where the challenge of modeling comes in, right? What we're looking for is a way to adjust these faces to where it's all one piece. Right? So I'm going to use, if I kind of look at this from the front view, it's going to be these two faces right here. So if I just select faces, sort of drag, it's these two right there, which if you look in perspective, is right there. So sometimes that's hard to figure out how to select those. You'll notice that if I'm looking at it from the side view, the edge that is like, sorry, let me go back to edge. That edge right there, right? It lines up with my x-axis, right? It's kind of hard to see on that screen, on that projector. But that edge lines up with my x-axis. In fact, that's why having our original model an even number of divisions is probably a good idea, right? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to choose the face on either side of that edge, right? So it's that one and that one. And again, another way you can select it is just to drag select here and just get those two. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to start extruding out this edge to get it, to start making this handle. And I'm just going to extrude it around and down here and connect it back into the bottom, right? Because, I mean, we can see that. Control E, hit move, we get that, right? Eventually, if I keep hitting Control E, I can get this thing around, kind of have to rotate it and move it. I can get this down here around and connect it into the bottom, right? However, like, I've seen, just when sort of left to their own devices, this is how a lot of students do this. They hit Control E, and they move it a little bit. And then they hit Control E, and they move it a little bit. And then they hit Control E, and they move it a little bit. And what's going to happen is, it's like you're making really tiny mistakes each time, right? So if you had to, you know, carve Michelangelo into stone, right? I'm sorry, not Michelangelo. David into stone, like Michelangelo's statue, right? He probably didn't start with like the pinky nail, right? He got the entire form and he refined that into more and more detail, right? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to try to get from the top of this down to the bottom of this in the fewest number of extrudes possible. I'm going to try to do it in either 2 or 3, right? I could do it in 2. It's a little more confusing. I'll probably do it in about 3. So let me undo those extrudes I just did. So first one, Control E. And I can use this tool here to pull it out. I can also sort of scale that in a little bit. And I'm going to do that just because if I look in my side view, you'll see that it's not really as thick. It's not as thick here as it is at the beginning, right? So I need a little bit of a bulge right in here. So after I get it sort of thinned out, I don't really want to use this extrude gizmo anymore to move it around. I just want to go back to my move and rotate tool so I can move and rotate the way I want to. So I'm just going to hit W to go back to my move tool. And I'm just going to start pulling this down here and trying to get it as close to this one as possible. So maybe like this. If I hit 1 though, notice that those faces are still pointing away from us. They're pointing in that direction, right? What I'm going to do is I'm going to rotate those around. I'm going to hit E, and I'm going to rotate those in this, my Z-axis, to start pointing them down. Because really what I'm wanting to do is pull them all the way back around into the bottom of this, right? These two here. So now I have it to here. I'm going to hit Control E again to extrude. Move this down a little bit.
Did you just grab the edges and shrink it down?
Yeah, you can do that, or you can use the scale tool in here, or you can just hit R and scale it that way. It works better when it was flat, because right now I'm going to try to scale it like this. But yeah, that was pretty much what I did. Just kind of scale them. I'm trying to keep them about the same width right now, though. So I have that. I'm going to get it over here a little closer. I could probably take it all the way over here now if I wanted to, but just for like convenience, let's just do something like this. E, rotate that. I'm not really going to worry about the depth of it too much just yet. Something like this. Right? And then Control E again to extrude it one more time. Pull those two out. And then let's go ahead and move this in. Rotate it here. So obviously not the right size yet, but we have these faces over here where we need them. I understand that this coffee cup does not, like that handle doesn't look right yet, right? But what I have is a piece of mesh that I can start working with and adding more edge loops and refining that. Right? So I'll come back to that in a minute. My biggest thing is getting that one piece of mesh in there. Right? How many of you did I lose over these last few steps? A few of you? Okay. So some of it is just the complication of extruding and moving that and rotating that. So just to go back again, I'll undo all of that really quickly and kind of go through the process again. But this may be one of those things that, like, this may be the part that you have to redo a few times. Right? In fact, this is always the part that I notice when I'm giving this lecture. This is the part that kind of people fight with. It's one of the reasons I put it in there. So here's where you get a chance to fight with the extrude tool. So Control E, going to allow you to extrude forward, right? And again, I'm just going to get this as far along as I can. Kind of go back and forth between 1 and 3. You'll notice that when I'm extruding, it's sort of flaring out. So that's one of the reasons I just go to R for the move tool, sort of scale that in a little bit, scale it down a little bit. If I want to flatten it out, I can scale on this x-axis, and it will also flatten it out. So I'm just trying to get something that's going to feel like that handle a little bit more. Now the hard part is, like, if I extrude it again here, it's going to just keep extruding away from the cup. I need to sort of bring this back in toward the cup, right? So the way I'm going to do that is to rotate it. So just hit E for rotate it down, pull it down. So we're kind of starting to route it back around this way. Control E again to extrude again. And now when I extrude, at least we're not going as far away from the cup, right? Now you have to be careful, like if I'm just using Z to pull out, like using the blue axis here, or the yellow axis right now, to pull out, it's going to pull it straight out. If I pull in this direction, it's going to do some stuff, but like it's not always what you would expect, right? So you can use that too. It's not that you just have to use Z. But for me, usually after I get it close, I just go to either the move or the rotate tool, W or E, or scale, to use it to sort of refine where I want this to be. And again, my biggest thing is I'm just trying to get it back down here to where it's facing these two faces. Right? Control E one more time. Get that down. W, E to rotate it. And then just to scale it up a little bit, although we'll get more opportunities to kind of connect this later. I'm just trying to get it down here to where it's where they're kind of near each other. Okay. Okay. Now if I smooth it, I'm getting something, right? I'm getting some form of handle. I want to have more control over that, so we'll come back to that in a minute. The first thing though is I still have this gap, right? It's still two pieces down here, and even if I push those through each other, it's still two pieces, right? So what I want to do is make them one piece. I want to weld those together. Right? And I could do that. I could just sort of weld vertices together. There's a tool for that. But there are faces that are in the way right now. Right? So here's the thing to remember about models in Maya. There's no material inside of there, right? A real coffee cup, if you pick it up, it's not just a shell of a coffee cup. If you cut into that, there's ceramic all the way through it, right? In Maya, that's not true, right? If I were to go over here and delete this face, right, you'll see it's hollow inside, right? There's nothing in there. It's not full of ceramic, right? So what we need to do is sort of delete these faces here and here. I'm just going to delete those. And then I'm going to weld these pieces together so it's still one contiguous mesh. Right? So think of models inside of Maya as these like balloon shapes, right? Like you watch the Macy's parade or whatever, and there's like the giant worm or the giant baby Trump or whatever balloon that's going through there. That's hollow, right? And they formed it into weird shapes, but inside of it, it's a balloon, right? Before I deleted these faces, this was a watertight balloon, right? If I would have, in theory, filled it up, there would not be any places for it to leak, right? Now there's places for it to leak. Now we can see the man behind the curtain and see that this isn't an actual model. So what we're going to do is kind of patch that up, right? And we're going to patch it up by patching these together. Now there's a couple of ways we can do that, a couple of tools I'll show you. One is the bridge tool. So a lot of these tools are under these mesh tools here. You can also find a lot of tools. If you click this button right up here, it's the little hammer with the box beside it. If I click that, this is our modeling toolkit. And there's a handful of tools in here that we could just find here, including our bridge tool right here. You can also find it up here again through mesh tools. I'm sorry, I think it's under edit mesh and bridge. Right? So either way, how this works is I choose two edges to bridge together. Right? There's a gap from here to here. I need to bridge that gap. I hit the bridge tool. It connects them together. So I could go around here and connect all of these with the bridge tool. So that's one option. And within that, I can also add additional divisions to that bridge if I wanted to. Right? I'm going to show you another way. And this is really my preferred method because it doesn't add additional mesh in here that I don't have control of. It's this target weld tool right here. So it's also, you can find it under mesh tools, target weld. So if I click on this target weld tool, I can click any of the edges or vertices or faces. So right now I'm in edge mode, right? And you'll see that as I mouse over, it turns that edge red, right? So if I click while it's red and hold that down, then I can drag to another edge. So this is the one I want, and release, and it will weld it together. It also works with vertices. If I right click and go to vertex, I can go to this vertex. I click it, drag it to this vertex, welds it together. So again, this is under Mesh Tools, Target Weld. So I go vertex, click, drag.
If you just use edge, will it still have vertices?
Yeah, an edge, if you do it with edge, all it's doing is dragging both of those vertices and welding them together, right? So if you think of it this way, if I'm on vertex right now, if I merge these two together, it's also going to weld that edge together. So it's whichever one, there's really not a difference. An edge is just two vertices connected together, really. So now the cool thing is if I hit 3, look at that. It's all one mesh. It fills all together. Unfortunately, it's still kind of ugly, right? This is the de-uglyizing stage. This is where we make it look good, right? So we have a piece of mesh now, and luckily, it's a simple piece of mesh. The reason that's lucky is because if there were 1,000 different edges in this thing, then you'd have to edit every one of them to get it to be the shape you want it. Instead, what I'm going to do is I'm going to insert edges here and there, just a few of them, and start trying to refine this shape, right? So I can go to my side view to do a lot of this here. So I can just sort of start placing things where I think they should be. There and there. So if I hit 4, I can sort of see through it, move these vertices where I want them. These vertices where I want them. Now the thing you'll notice is if I hit 3 now, that's sort of softening it to where it's not the right shape, right? But that's because I have a big span to soften. If I start adding more edges to it, it's going to stay closer to the shape that I make when it's not smooth. So again, Mesh Tools, insert edge loop. I'll go ahead and insert one there. And as soon as I'm done inserting it, it's still kind of selected. So if I just hit W, I can just move it to where I want it, maybe scale it a little bit. Or you can go back to vertex and scale it that way, right? So now as I start smoothing it, you're going to see it's staying a little closer, right? So I'm going to add some more here and here as well. Again, my insert edge loop tool is still there. Insert one there. And then just move that up a little bit. Let's see how that's looking. Closer. Same down here. Hit G. Insert edge loop. Move that down. Getting closer. I'm going to go ahead and adjust these vertices a little bit more. Like that and that.
How are you selecting all the vertices on there at one time? It's not letting you do that.
If I'm in the front view here, I just drag selecting them. It's not letting you select them that way? Are you on edge mode still yet?
No, I was on vertex mode, but it wasn't letting me do that.
Is it now or?
I wasn't drag selecting.
Oh, okay.
I didn't realize this would do that.
Yeah, I'm kind of like, I'm dragging like a marquee box around this. So if you go in here and look, I just drag this and click, drag. You can't really see the selection. If I click out here, you can, right? And it's selecting all of them. I think it's that white background. You can't see my marquee on there where I'm selecting them. So as I do this, I also want to occasionally bounce out here and look at it in perspective. So this ring I just made is actually kind of wide. So maybe I'll scale that in just a little bit to keep it the width of the handle. Like this, right? And so it's getting closer. Starting to see it's like looking more like that shape. I can always, again, go in here to my vertices and sort of move those around and get them closer to where I want it to be. It's not necessarily a case right now that I'm trying to keep this as low polygon as possible. It's more of I don't want to be wasteful and put in a ton of them, right? So I can keep inserting as many as I want to make it the shape I want it to be, right? So again, insert edge loop. I could put another one here and move it up. Put another one here. Sort of move it a little bit. I feel like this one's off now. So now if I hit 3, like that's right on it, right? I still feel like there needs to be a little more detail here on how it transitions to this. So if I hit 4, see how it's like kind of doing this. So I'm going to go ahead and insert one more edge loop right here and see if I can get that shape to sort of do the thing I want it to do. This may take 2 of them. I'm going to have to go and kind of closer here. Scale that up like this. And then hit another one right here next to it. And sort of shrink it down a little bit. So let's see what that looks like in perspective. Oh, that's looking pretty neat. I like that. And so I'll do that at the top again. Make sure width, we're looking okay.
So I'm getting something weird. Like I've got this weird fold on the bottom that I don't have on the top, like where I connected. And I don't know how to make it look the same.
On your yeah, let me come back. Let me finish this up, and then because we actually just have to do the top, and then we're actually done. So, and I'll kind of walk around for the rest here to help you out. So again, insert some edge loops on the top. Probably do something very similar there, like 2 of them here. One for this one, maybe make it maybe go in here to vertices, get these a little closer. This one, drag these in a little bit. So again, this is just me like nitpicking now to get it as close as I can, but I'm actually pretty happy with this. This turns out pretty well for a coffee cup, right? Last thing I'll say is to sort of think smart about this, because we know that there are ways to simulate liquid inside of Maya. Right? We can have water pouring down a hall. We can have the Titanic flooding or whatever. That's not what I need for my coffee cup, right? I need something that looks like coffee. You've probably all heard this phrase before, like work smarter, not harder. Like if my coffee is not going to be pouring out everywhere, then all I need is a cylinder inside of my coffee cup that has a different texture on it, right? And now it looks like I have coffee in there. If I put a little detail in that, maybe add some ripples to it, maybe some different texture to it, I can fake coffee, right? That's not cheating. That's like, it's just pixels, right? It's not, that coffee is not real. It just has to look real, right? Or has to look correct, not real. So, so I think after doing this, like you have some more modeling tools. This is not all of the modeling tools. There's like, you saw them, if I go to mesh tools right here, like there's a ton there, and there's all these edit mesh tools as well, right? So there's lots of ways that we can adjust these models, right? If you're curious about what one of these does, save your file and try it. Like save the model, test one of them out and say, hey, I wonder what chamfer vertices means. Well, save it, that way you don't mess anything up. Grab a vertex, go edit mesh, chamfer vertices. Oh, it does that. So that might be something you need someday. Probably not today, so we'll delete that. But now that's in your toolbox. Now you know how to use that screwdriver or that Allen wrench, and whenever you see something that needs that, you can try it out. Right? That's the way you learn how to model is to learn what these tools do, and then try them out. There's a dozen different ways we can do everything we need to do in here. So for the next few days, these are kind of going to be time. They're going to be some time for you to sort of work on your own to get models made. Right? Next class period, I'm going to bring in a model and give it to you, and we're going to unwrap it. We're going to do UV unwrapping. That probably, maybe, will not take the entire class time. And then there's going to be like work time here and there. So start making your models. Don't sort of save it all up to the end. Like take that list that's in V2L. Start making your flower vase in the center, or your syrup bottle, or whatever it is you're making, right? And then kind of come in and work along with me in class, and we'll get through this a little bit at a time. So, last thing I wanted to talk about. I'm just going to minimize this for a second. On the back of your screen or on your desktop screen, Michelle Maynard is going to be talking to Edge over Skype next class period. I'm sorry, not next class period. Next Thursday, next day that we come to ETSU. She's a friend of mine. I worked with her for Access Games. I've known her for a long time. And she is a really interesting person. I strongly encourage you all to come out to this for a couple of reasons. One, she has a perspective from kind of a lot of different parts of the gaming and digital media industry. Two, she's extremely entertaining. Right? She's very funny. She's very witty. I guarantee she will make you laugh. And three, she's a woman. And currently in America, women make up about 51% of the workforce. But in the game industry, they make up 20% of the workforce. In digital media as a major right now, we're approaching half and half. So you ladies are getting ready to change the world. She'll tell you how to do it. So I strongly encourage you to come out for that. And you guys, you're going to be working with these ladies, and they're going to make your life better. So come out and encourage them and empower that as well. So I strongly encourage you to come check that out. A couple weeks later, I don't remember the exact date. I think it's out on there's actually posters hanging out. Mark Thomas from Bethesda Games is going to be speaking via Skype, and he was one of the animators for Dogmeat and a couple of the other. He actually just finished working on Fallout 76. So 76. I keep getting the number wrong. Right? So come out and check those things out. I think it'll be in this room Thursday nights at 8:15. 8:15. So. Otherwise, rest of the class is yours. I'll kind of hop around. I'm going to go ahead and stop the video and upload it, and I'll hop around if anybody has any sort of leftover hanging questions. So, cool.